Hello, and welcome to the developer training session, where we'll learn how to customize Confluence with Forge, Atlassian's cloud development platform. I'm Neil, a developer advocate at Atlassian, which means that I advocate on behalf of all developers who build things on top of the Atlassian platform, including marketplace partners, solution partners, as well as customers who build custom apps for themselves to use within their own company. Here's what we're going to learn today. Maybe you've had a head start and began researching Forge. Maybe you've already built your first Forge app. You can use this as an opportunity to reinforce some of the concepts that you might have seen earlier, but perhaps gleaned over. And some of you may not be software developers at all, and that's perfectly fine. That being said, there may be some topics and terminology we'll be covering that might not fully sink in right away, and that's, again, completely fine too. I realize that we all learn new things in different ways and at different paces. Some folks like to try and read and comprehend every concept before they write a single line of code, while others' learning style is more trial by fire, trial and error, and that's me. I like to learn by example, and that's what we're going to do today, learning by building some Forge apps together. First, we're going to start looking at Forge at a very, very high level. What is Forge? Why does it exist? And how does it work? Forge is Atlassian's serverless development platform designed specifically for extending Atlassian cloud products. It's quick to get started building an app, even for those that don't consider themselves software developers. Forge helps you to build powerful apps faster, that are easier to manage because it handles a lot of the heavy lifting for you. Atlassian has built other frameworks and tools for building apps in the cloud. So why did we build Forge? And why should you be interested in learning how to build apps with Forge? On that last slide, I described Forge as a serverless development platform. And part of what that means is that Forge apps run and store data in the Atlassian cloud alongside the products. So by Forge apps running inside the Atlassian cloud means that you don't need to go spin up your own servers and databases. Atlassian handles all the infrastructure management for you, including data storage. And that's a big deal. It can save you a lot of time, money, and heartache not having to manage all that infrastructure. From the onset, security was top of mind when it came to creating Forge. When you build apps with Forge, you can rest assured that you're leveraging a platform that adheres to best practices in security. Atlassian provides robust security measures, including things like managed authentication, authorization, tenant isolation, data management, etc. Similar to what I mentioned on that last slide, having the Forge platform provide these security measures not only provides a security posture that benefits our users and customers, but it also frees up more time and resources for you to focus on things like innovation. And finally, Forge empowers you to create highly customized apps with robust features and polished user interfaces. Do you want to display critical information on a different area of the product, or perhaps maybe even create a fully custom user interface with your own assets? You can do that with Forge. Forge gives you a couple of different ways to build out UIs, with pre-built components with something that we call UI Kit, and there's also another option called Custom UI. And we're going to be using UI Kit in our projects today. So in a nutshell, Forge lets you focus more on the innovation of your apps, the things that make your apps useful, unique, and delightful, and worry less about the infrastructure aspects. So who's using Forge? Let me start by saying that these aren't distinct groups, but just general buckets of who's using Forge today. So first we have developers, because after all, it is an app development platform. Next, we have admins and power users that use Forge, and they build apps for their own organizations. Also, we're finding that end users are finding it very easy to get started building apps out of the box, and they're using it to improve how they work within the Atlassian products. Next, we have partners, both solution partners and marketplace partners. More marketplace apps are being built on Forge today than ever before. And lastly, Atlassian team members themselves. Thousands of Forge apps have been built and are being used internally by Atlassian employees every day. And out of the thousands of apps built by my fellow Atlassians, there are a few available for free on the marketplace where you can check them out for yourself. One example app is a simple Confluence macro called localized date macro for Confluence. And the second one is another Confluence app that helps folks manage the decision-making workflow. It's a little more complex than the first app because it utilizes some Confluence REST APIs. So for that first app, if you work with teams or team members in different time zones, then this Forge app is definitely meant for you. At Atlassian, we work with colleagues based all around the globe, covering multiple continents, and with that, a multitude of different time zones. And working with colleagues across multiple time zones, you know that it's not trivial to know which date an author of a Confluence page is referring to when they pop a bunch of dates onto a page. And with the localized date macro built with Forge, a page author uses this macro to insert a date. When other users are reading the page, the dates are displayed in a user's local time zone. And behind the scenes, it was actually an engineering manager who came up with this idea, and he built this macro, this app with Forge in just a few hours. If you'd like to try it out for yourself, just visit the link above. Another app built by one of our colleagues is called the Decision Helper. At Atlassian, if a decision impacts multiple teams or stakeholders, we use a decision-making process called DACI, D-A-C-I, which stands for Driver, Approver, Contributor, and Informed. This play helps to ensure that everyone's voices are heard and considered, leading to a more informed and collaborative decision. To start a DACI, we typically use a template which guides the user on how to organize and collaborate as they go through a decision-making process. However, a couple of colleagues thought they could make the DACI process even better by building an app that drives the process. This app enables teams to make decisions faster by clearly indicating who is responsible for a decision and when it's due. As the DACI progresses through the workflow, the app adds comments to the page to notify stakeholders and send reminder notifications when decision due date's approaching. The Decision Helper is a really great example of how you can use Forge to help put a great idea into action and to help teams improve how they work. If you want to learn more about the DACI framework, you can visit that link above, or check out the DACI Helper app on the marketplace. That second link on the page. I also mentioned there are partners that build apps, and these are a few examples of popular apps also built on Forge. Usage statistics for Confluence by Lively Apps helps to uncover useful insights about contributors and content on your Confluence instance. It also generates nice detailed charts and stats on spaces, such as the most popular content, top contributors, and most active content. AutoPage, an app by Cybert Media that links your Jira Cloud and Confluence Cloud instances to keep documentation in sync, also allows you to automatically create pages on Confluence with Jira information. And if any changes are made to a Jira ticket, those changes are automatically synced to the Confluence page. And lastly, the Spacecraft theme, also built by Cybert Media, helps you to create beautiful public spaces and documentation. This app helps you to easily design your public space with a theming editor, customizing every aspect, including adding your company logo, custom backgrounds, colors, and layout to fit your company brand. So far, we've covered a high level of what Forge is, who's using it, and even provided a few examples of apps that have been built on Forge. Next, we're going to learn about a few fundamental parts of Forge, and once we have a basic understanding of these things, we'll be in a great position to start building our first Forge apps for Confluence. Let's dive right in. The first fundamental part of Forge is the command line interface, or the CLI. So what is the CLI? It's a simple yet powerful tool that lets you easily and quickly create, deploy, and install Forge apps. Now, it does have many other useful features, some that we'll be using in the exercises later. But if there is one takeaway from this slide, it's that building a Forge app always begins with the Forge CLI. The CLI works the same across PC, Mac, or Linux. You simply go to the command prompt on Windows or the terminal shell on Mac or Linux, and that's where you'll use the Forge CLI. If you don't have the Forge CLI installed yet, we'll set aside some time to help you get set up before we begin building our first Forge apps. Another fundamental part of Forge is the manifest. Every Forge app needs one. The manifest can be thought of as a blueprint for your app. This is a file that outlines the different Forge modules, functions, and resources that your app will use to extend the product, like Confluence. It's just a text file with a format that's called YAML, and it's a format often used for writing configuration files, and it's intended to be easy to read. So again, the manifest, it's just a text file which describes and maps the structure and functionality of your app. We'll be getting hands-on with the manifest in the exercises, where it'll be a lot easier to understand what its purpose is. The last fundamental part of Forge we'll cover right now are called modules. And if the manifest is a blueprint, you can think of modules as the building blocks. In Forge, you're provided with modules that allow your app to extend and interact with Atlassian products. Modules give your app capabilities of doing things inside the product, like Jira or Confluence. If you look at the manifest up here on the screen, this app is using the Confluence Global Page module. And this module allows your app to display content in the place of a Confluence page. You'd use this module if you need a lot of screen real estate for something like generating full screen reports. And we'll be using this module later today. Whatever module your app needs, you simply have to add it to the app's manifest file. And of course, a list of every available module is in the documentation at developer.atlassian.com. There are modules that are common across all products, and we call them common modules in the documentation. These modules are product agnostic, and you'd use them whether you're building a Forge app for Jira, Confluence, Bitbucket, or Compass. And there are also product-specific modules, and these modules are the ones that provide unique functionality for your app relative to the product you're building for. So today, of course, we're utilizing several of the Confluence-specific modules. Many of the modules give your app the ability to integrate into different parts of the Confluence user interface. On an earlier slide, I mentioned the global page module. Let's take a look at a few other Confluence-specific modules. Here's the macro module. To give your app the ability to be inserted as a macro, you simply have to add this module to your manifest. You would use this module when you want your app to insert dynamic content directly into the editor initiated by a user action. It's never been easier to create your own custom macros with Forge, and your macro will be visible and accessible to all users on an instance once it's been installed. Here's another Confluence module called the Content Action module, and this module adds a menu item to the More Actions, that ... menu, on Confluence pages and blogs. When the menu item is clicked, your app will open up a modal dialog box and run a function within your app and display it there in that modal. And one more Confluence module is the Context Menu module. This displays an entry for your app in the context menu when a user selects or highlights text on a page. You'd use this when you want your app to interact with specific text that the user highlighted. And you probably use this all the time. If you leave inline comments on a Confluence page, you've used the context menu. Well, today we're going to learn how to build an app that will live right alongside that comment button and try and have it do something useful and cool. And those were just a few. In the documentation, you'll discover that there are a whole bunch of other Confluence-specific modules that can help you build an app that can integrate smoothly into different areas of the Confluence user interface. So we've covered the high-level benefits of Forge, a few of the platform fundamentals like the CLI, manifest, and modules. It's now time for us to apply some of the things we've just learned and start building our first Forge app for Confluence. Are you ready? All right. So to follow along in this workshop, you're going to need to get your development environment set up on your laptop. And don't worry, it shouldn't take very long. So first thing you'll need is Node.js. The Forge CLI requires Node.js to be installed. So Node.js, it's a free and open source JavaScript runtime environment. If you haven't guessed it yet, Forge apps are built using JavaScript or TypeScript. Once you have Node.js installed, you're going to be installing the Forge CLI, or the command line interface. Again, the Forge CLI, it's the tool for building and deploying and installing Forge apps. Then you'll need your own free Confluence Cloud instance for development and testing. Even if you have admin access to your company's Confluence site, we highly recommend using a test site, your own development and testing playground. And while not required, a code editor that is JavaScript aware is recommended. I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code. It's a free editor that you can download, and you're going to see me using it throughout the workshop. If you visit the URL above, code.atlassian.com/forge-101, it'll take you to a getting started guide for Forge, which includes detailed instructions for installing Node.js, installing the Forge CLI, and more. If you don't have your dev environment set up yet, you could just pause right now and then come back when you're all ready. When you're first learning a new programming language or framework, the first thing you've got to do is build an app that just prints out the words "Hello World." And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to build our very first Forge app together called Hello World. We're going to build this app in about 5 minutes. And so for this first exercise, there's a few commands we're going to try from the Forge CLI. The first is Forge create. We're going to select a few presets from the templates available. We're going to deploy the app into the cloud, and then we're going to install it on our instance. So I'm going to hop out of presentation mode and hop into the command line interface. Okay, so my desktop is set up with a bunch of windows. Here I have my terminal prompt where I'll be typing in my Forge commands. And then I also have my code editor or Visual Studio up here. And on the right, I'm going to keep a browser. We'll be jumping between them, and I'll try to jump slowly so that you can see me hopping from window to window. I'm also going to pull up the directions that we're going to follow. And these are the commands that we need to type in. So we're going to start with the very first one, and that would be forge create. And the first thing it's going to ask us to do is enter a name for the app. Let's just call this app Hello World. And following the directions, we need to go down to the category UI kit. We'll choose Confluence. I'm using the up and down arrows here. Confluence. And then we're going to select Confluence macro. Scroll down here and hit enter. Now what it's doing now, it's downloading a template of the app, like a boilerplate, some sample code, and it's creating a new folder on my local machine. It's also registering the app, meaning that now I have this app called Hello World that is associated with my Atlassian account, and it's creating some environments as well, which we'll talk a little bit about later. All right, so the message here is your app is ready to work on, deploy, and install. We created 3 environments, and then the instructions are change to the directory Hello World to see your app files. So we'll go cd hello world, clear my screen, and let's take a look. I'm using the ls command. On Windows, it might be dir. And here we go. This is what was created, and this is essentially the source code for the app. So let's minimize these commands up here, and let's open this up inside Visual Studio. So here is the Hello World app that was just created. Let's take a look at some of the files in this project. First is the manifest. Again, the manifest is like the blueprint of our app. And the important thing here is that in the modules list, you'll see that we have this macro word, and that means that we are using the Forge module called macro. And this being the blueprint for our app, and it maps some of the functionality into our code. So speaking of code, let's take a look at the source code. If we open up the source folder, you'll notice that there's 2 folders here. There's front end and resolvers. We're going to focus on the front end because this really doesn't have any back end utility yet. And that's actually what goes on in here inside this resolvers folder. Let's open up the front end folder and open up the file index.jsx. All right, I'm going to expand this a little bit. And what we have here is our source code for the front end. And looking at lines 14 and 15, this is essentially the heart of the app. What it's doing here is it's printing out this text, hello world. And again, because this is a macro module, when we're inside of our Confluence editor, we add this macro, we'll see that it'll print out this text, hello world. And there's this other function down here, this other text fragment, which maybe we'll talk a little bit about later. But let's just save this and head back to our terminal prompt, and let's type in the next command, which is forge deploy. Now what this is going to do is running a linter or a syntax checker to see if there's any syntax errors in our code. And it is now packaging up all of the source code to our app. It's uploading it into the Atlassian cloud. It's checking that the manifest syntax is good. And once this is done, our app will be ready to be executed. The message here was deployed hello world to the development environment. So what do you think? What state are we in? Are we ready to see the app running on our Confluence instance? Not quite yet. The next command we have to use is forge install. And this will ask us, which product do we want to install this onto? It would be Confluence. Type in the name of your dev instance. This would be mine. At this point, you're going to want to type in the site URL for your dev instance, not mine. Otherwise, you won't be able to install it because you won't have the proper permissions. So type in the name of your dev instance, and it's going to ask you to confirm. Answer yes. Now it says installing your app onto development. And once it's complete, it'll tell you your app is in the development environment and is now installed on your testing instance. So let's head over to our testing instance right now. And that's the window here on the right hand side. And we're going to go to apps, manage apps. Let's just make sure that it's in there. And there it is, the Hello World development that was just installed. Let's see this thing in action before we do anything else. We'll create a new page. Give it a title. Head down to the body. And let's search for our macro. Now to insert macros on Confluence, you just hit the / and we're going to look for hello. Let's type in HELLO, and there it is. That is our new Forge macro we just created. And lo and behold, there it is, hello world. It actually prints hello world twice, and we'll get into that in a second. But excellent, it's there. So if we were to publish this, next time you view this page, hello world and hello world. Excellent, we did it. Why don't we just make a slight change to the code and make sure that this is really the app that we just deployed. Hello world from index.jsx. So I'm heading over to line 14 and I'm adding just some extra text here because we want to see that reflected over here. And I'm going to hit save. Now I'm going to use a new Forge command that I did not talk about yet, and that's called Forge tunnel. Because what I could do is I could deploy this, but what I'm going to do instead, I'm going to run this command called Forge tunnel, and what it's going to allow us to do is to quickly test and debug any quick changes that we might have added to some of our JavaScript code. And so it's going to do the same thing similar to what we see when we deploy. It's going to do a syntax check. Now it says listening for requests. Now the magic here is that any changes that I made here are going to be instantly visible here. So if I were to reload this Confluence page, we should see hello world from index.jsx, and we do. It's right there. And what's really neat is that if you head back to our terminal, our command prompt where we typed in Forge tunnel, it said listening for requests. And look what it just did. When I reloaded this page, it intercepted essentially the invocation or the run of our macro. And instead of using the Atlassian Cloud version that I deployed earlier, it's using the version that's running on my computer right here. So just to show you again, like index.jsx, let's add some more text. Making another change. And I'm going to save it. And look what happens when I save it. Head down to the terminal. It's going to recheck instantly. I don't have to do anything. Instantly check for any changes. If it detected changes, it'll recheck all the syntax, and it says again requests, and on the right hand side it automatically affected the change on the page, and this request to run this Forge macro that we just created goes to my laptop. That's the benefit of using this thing called the tunnel. So trivia here, let's say I kill the tunnel with a Control-C command. Now it says stopping tunnel. What do you think is going to happen when I reload this Confluence page here? What text will it show? Will it say making another change? Will it say hello world from index.jsx? Well, let's try it. Let's reload this page. And guess what? It's back to hello world. Why is that? Well, we did not deploy the changes. So every time you make changes to code, to your app, you need to do something like this, Forge deploy. So again, doing some syntax checking. And now it is packaging up the app from my local computer, and it's uploading it to the cloud, which means that the moment that this is complete in this terminal window here, when I reload this page over here, it should show these changes here that we made on line 14. Let's take a look. All right, deployed hello world to the development environment. Let's reload. And there you have it. The change has been deployed, and now, not running through the tunnel, but running on the cloud version of our Forge macro hello world are our changes. Awesome. Well, congratulations. Maybe it doesn't seem like that big of a deal to you, but from how I see it, just done something that probably less than 0.1% of Confluence users can do. You built a macro and you did it using Forge. But if you're sitting there and not particularly as excited as I am, Maybe it's because that macro didn't do a whole lot. I mean, it was cool to see your custom macro show up in the editor, but you're probably thinking there's got to be more than just printing hello world. And you're right. So for the next exercise, we're going to enhance that macro with some dynamic data. But before we start hacking away at that, we need to take a sidebar and talk a little bit about the Confluence REST API. So our next section is about product APIs and extensibility. API stands for Application Programming Interface, and in layman's terms, it's a way to allow different computer systems to communicate and share information. So for example, if we wanted our Forge app to fetch a page from Confluence, our app will send an API request to get a page. And the Confluence in return is going to send the API response with the details about the page that we requested. There may be a few of you that have used the Confluence API before, but I'm guessing there's probably even more of you that weren't even aware that Confluence has an API. The Confluence API provides a standard way for apps to communicate with Confluence, and that includes fetching data from Confluence, like reading a list of spaces, pages, or comments, as well as sending data to Confluence, like if you wanted your app to create a new page or add a comment to a page. Just about anything that you can do in the Confluence product, you can also perform using the API. To see all the different types of API methods that are available, let's just quickly glance at the documentation. Just open up a web browser or a new tab to developer.atlassian.com. And I'm going to hop into a web browser and do this right now, and you can just follow along there if you'd like. All right, so here we are at developer.atlassian.com. At the very top of the page, you're going to see a tab called Documentation. Click on that, and then click on Confluence Cloud. And this will bring us to the Confluence REST API docs. On the left-hand side, you're going to see a whole bunch of groups or categories, and we call these resources. So for example, here's the page resource, and underneath that page resources is a bunch of API methods. So for example, if you wanted to get a page by the page ID, this is how you would do it. And this is all the information about the API method mechanics, what permissions that are required, what a request looks like, and what the response looks like. But for our sake, what's really great is we have code samples here. So here's the code sample for Forge, in which if you look at line 3, this will import the necessary library for us to make API calls. Line 5 on down is something you can most likely copy and paste to make an API request to fetch a specific page. And then there's even some console log output to show us what the response is coming back from Confluence after we make the API call. I'm going to head over to, on the left-hand side here, you'll see that there's REST API v2 and REST API. There are two versions of the API, but just for the sake of our next exercise, head over to the REST API, which is like essentially the REST API v1, and we're going to scroll down to the user's resources. And here's a bunch of methods. And specifically, I'd like to get to this method here, which is get the current user. This method, getCurrentUser, says that it returns a currently logged in user. This includes information about the user, like the display name, user key, account ID, etc. And this is how we would do it in Forge. But you can also, if you wanted to, head over to your testing instance and just go to your browser if you're logged in. And let's just try this out ourselves. Testing. Just paste it into your browser, and here's the API response. And just like the doc said, it's going to include information like email address, the display name, the public name, etc. And this is the API method that we're going to use in our next exercise. Feel free to peruse the documentation and see all the different things that you can do. So have you ever received one of these things in your physical mailbox at home where it looks like a personal handwritten letter to you? And you know it's just junk mail, but some of these are so convincing that part of you thinks, wait, did a small business take the time to personally handwrite this letter to me? And these advertisements are really good at capturing our attention, not just because it appears handwritten, but because it also includes our name in the salutation. Well, we're about to pull off the same thing with the knowledge we've just picked up about the Confluence REST API. In this next exercise, we're going to enhance our macro by making it a bit more dynamic. We'll use a REST API to greet each person reading our page, by their name. That's right. Our macro is going to make users believe that the content on the page was crafted just for them. So let's go back to our editor and plan out what steps we need to take to make this happen. All right. So on the left-hand side, again, I have my code editor. On the right-hand side, I have my browser. And then down here, I have my terminal. So at the moment, we're just printing out a couple lines here. Hello world from index.jsx. And then there's a second hello world that's actually coming from this resolver's backend. Okay. So the first thing I'd like to do is maybe let's just get rid of this line here, line 14. And if we save that, let's go into our, one other change we'll make before we run our tunnel is go into this resolver's index.js. Instead of saying hello world, we'll just make it say, let's just put my name in here, Neil. All right, great. So I saved that, and I saved this. So what do you think is going to happen when I run the tunnel? If I were to reload this page on the right once this tunnels is established, the changes are, I think we got rid of that first line where it was just some static text. We just have the second line that's getting some data from that backend. Let's just see what happens. Let's reload this. This is something that I typed onto the page. This is actually from the macro right here. So we just return Neil. So let's put the word hello and then Neil, put an exclamation there, save. So again, I just add the word hello, add exclamation mark, and I saved it. Oh, look at that. It just already made the change to put hello, Neil. So let's make this more dynamic and let's get the current user's name. If we head over to the index.js on the back end and we want to make an API call, fetch that dynamic data. Let's go and take a look at the documentation for get current user. And there's a couple things in here we'll need to copy and paste. So the first thing is that we need to copy this line 3. And this imports the library that allows us to make API calls. So I'm going to go to the very top. I'm going to paste that right there. So I saved that, and you can see the tunnel here is reinitializing. It's not really going to do anything because we're not making any API calls yet. What we want to do is get the API right in here. Let's just comment out this line and we'll put a little to do. Make an API call to Confluence to get the current user. Okay. We're going to copy and paste here. I'm in the documentation on lines 5 through 12 in our code snippet. I'm going to pop that right here. You'll notice that there's these little squiggly lines underneath this await keyword here, and it's telling us that there's an error. And the reason there's an error there is because we need to add another keyword here that allows that API call to be run asynchronously. And we just had to type in this word async. So again, on line 6, I'm adding this word async right here. And you notice this error disappeared. Now, I saved this, and I looked down at my tunnel, and it gave me an error. It's saying that read Confluence user is needed, this permission scope. So we look at our manifest, and they're right. There are no scopes in here. So I'm going to hit Control-C down here and end the tunnel. So I'm going to copy this and paste it. And let's take a look up here at the manifest. There it is. It added this section to our manifest. Permissions, scopes, it added this right here. And why did it add that? It added that because it knew when it ran the linter that we were using an API method that, if you look at the documentation, says this is what's needed, right? This is the scope that is required in order to make this API call. And so when we ran that lint fix, it added these lines to our manifest. So I saved it. Now here's the thing, whenever you make a change to a material change to the manifest like this, where there's permissions, we can deploy those changes. But you'll see when we deploy these changes, we're going to be presented with the message saying that, well, you made changes to the scope, so therefore you're going to have to run an additional command. Again, you'll only see this whenever you add additional permissions to a manifest. There it is. We've detected new scopes or egress URLs. Run this command and then restart your tunnel. What this is going to do is present a list of all of the instances that have our Hello World app installed, and I only have one. And I'm going to hit enter, and it's saying, your app will be upgraded with the following additional scopes. Read Confluence user. Do you want to continue? Yes, we do. And now we can run our Forge tunnel, because if we tried running our Forge tunnel before we did the install upgrade, it would not be able to make that API call because it did not have that scope when we installed it last. So let's run Forge tunnel. And again, back to our code. First thing we did is we imported the API library. The second thing that we did was we pasted in this code from the documentation to make the API call, but we didn't do anything else. So visually on the page, the macro should essentially present the same thing. Hello, and then we return Neil. But what has changed is we're making an API call, and we're going to be able to see what's happening here because of these console logs. So let's reload. Should still say hello, Neil on the right-hand side, but now we have some new console log output. So line 16, it's printing this line out. It just says, hey, 200 OK. This larger section of JSON output from our API response came from line 17. That's what generated this. And if you look closely, what we want is that display name, right? So let's comment out this line right here, line number 16, that just sends out that first 200 OK. Instead of console logging it, let's put this inside of a variable. We'll call it current user is equal to, and we'll get rid of that console log and this extra parenthesis. So now inside this variable current user is going to be all of this from here down. Let's console log current user dot, what would it be? Display name. And let's see what happens. I'm going to save this. Listening for requests. What do you think it's going to look like on the right-hand side? If you said it's going to look the same, you're right. It's still static. It's still going to return Neil. But what we're looking for is, what is this going to return on our terminal? So on the right, it still says hello, Neil. But here it says our user's name, Beyonce Mars. So let's return that instead. Let's return current user.displayName. And then we can comment out that. What I expect to happen is on the right-hand side, it should say, hello, Beyonce Mars. Let's reload. There it is. Awesome. We did it. We were able to take something that was very static, which just said hello world before, and we now are getting the current user's name. If a different user was viewing this page, their name would pop up here instead of my current user's names, which is Beyonce Mars. Well, congratulations. So far, you've learned how to build a macro with Forge, as well as a bit about making API calls from your app to add a little dynamic data into that macro. In our last exercises, we were using the macro module. Now we're going to explore other modules available that help us put our Forge apps into different areas of Confluence. In this next exercise, we'll be using a module called the global page. When we use this module, it will render our app on a full page, giving us a large area of screen real estate that we can use for a number of different things. Here's an example of what a Forge app looks like using the global page module. It's a lot of space to do a variety of things. You could generate reports and charts. You can present a whole lot more. And by the way, the reason that this is called the global page is because it's at the top global level. And what that means is that there isn't any space or page context for our app. Therefore, when a user is viewing our Forge app on a global page, the app isn't aware of any specific space or page that the user was just in. To contrast, when we built a macro in the earlier exercise, our app was aware of the space in the page that the user was currently on. So you ready to try it out for yourself? We're going to create this from scratch with just a few commands in the Forge CLI. We'll be using Forge Create and selecting these values, UIKit, Confluence, the Confluence global page. Then we'll be deploying the app. And then finally, we'll install the app on our test instance and see it in action. Let me hop over to my terminal and browser window, and you can follow along on your machine too. On the top left of my screen are the commands that we'll be using on the Forge CLI. I'm going to pull up some of the documentation for the global page module in my browser. Even though we won't need it for this exercise, it's still a good idea to get familiar with navigating the Atlassian developer docs. So just go over to developer.atlassian.com. I'm going to search for global page, find Confluence, and there you go. All right, let's head over to the terminal where we'll create a new app. Try Forge Create. We'll name our app Global Hello World, UIKit, then Confluence, and then Confluence global page. Similar to what happened last time we used this, it's downloading a template of an app that's using the global page module. It's registering the app, and it's also creating the environments, and then it's going to put it on my local machine. All right, it's completed. Your app is ready to work on. It says change that into the directory. So we're just going to go type in cd space here. Let's take a look and see what it created for us. Okay, that's the source code. And let's just go right into the deploy and install so we can see it in action. And then we can jump into the code. Again, doing some syntax checking. Now it's deploying it into our development environment, packaging up the entire app, and uploading it into the Atlassian Cloud. All right, it says it's deployed. Now, is it on our instance yet? Not quite. One more command. That'd be forge install. We're going to select Confluence, and then type in the URL for your testing instance. Again, this is mine. You have to type in your own. All right, great. So I'm going to expand my browser window a bit. Now, if you click on apps in the drop-down after it's installed, you should see your app at the very top. So let's click on that. Well, and there we have it. Now, very similar to the macro example where it was just printing hello world. Well, it's now doing the exact same thing. However, it's doing it in a global page. So we have all the screen real estate. If we open up our editor and look at the source code, you'll notice that it'll look very similar to what we built with the macro hello world. Again, it's just returning these text fragments. And so if we want to do something like, let's say, make it say something different. Hello, this is in a global page. I'm going to save that. And let's go back to our terminal and let's run that tunnel again. Again, what the tunnel does, kind of creates a gateway between my Confluence instance running over here and any invocations of my Forge app will be redirected to my machine. So here we go. Let's try this again. I'm going to reload. And it intercepted the request. And look, there it is. Hello, this is the global page. Awesome. A few minutes ago, I showed this example of a Forge app running in a global page, and it had a bit more style, some colors, different font sizes, and some spacing. Well, it's easy to add these different elements and style components to our UI. For a deeper dive into how to design and build UIs for your app, check out the user interface page, which you can find in the documentation under the platform concept section from the left nav, or just visit the URL above to jump directly to it. In this section of the docs, you can learn about the different extension points for your Forge apps within Atlassian products and find all the different pre-built components for UIKit. Okay, hopping over to my other screen. At the top left up here, I've included that screenshot of that demo global page. We're going to do our best to take our new vanilla global page app and model it to look similar to that UI that's up there in the top left. To do that, we're going to be referring to the developer documentation. So keep this browser available. In my browser, I have two tabs open. The first one is our Forge app that we just created and installed, and the documentation in the second tab. Oh, and at the bottom of my screen, you'll notice I have my terminal here, and I still have the Forge tunnel running. I'm going to keep it running so we can iterate on our code and instantly see the changes taking place on our Forge app running inside Confluence. Let's start by exploring some of these UIKit components. If you head over to the browser, and if you're on this page, you can just click on this Explore UIKit Components link here. You can either search for it as well. And lastly, if you are already in the docs, you can go to Reference, User Interface, and on the left-hand side, click on UIKit Components. Great. Again, this is the page that we're trying to model. Right now, our page looks like this. So maybe the first step, copy some of this text that we have. The Confluence Global Page module in Forge. Get rid of that one. And let's add another text component here. To render your app on a full page, simply add the global page module. And the third one, with this module, you've got a lot of room to play around with. So you could put any text that you want in here, but I'm gonna shorten this one. Use cases are endless. All right, so I'm gonna save this. Now that I hit Control S, take a look at the right-hand side, and there it is. What's different? Well, this is really that formatted in terms of the size of the font, or these background colors, or these little, is that a table or some boxes? I'm not sure what that is, but let's try to figure out what we would need to do from the top down. Let's say this line right here. Let's head over to the documentation and let's take a look. Right now, we're using the text component. And here are the properties for a text component. Whether you're adding a code block, or you want to strike through, emphasis like italics, or strong like bold. I have some examples here. Let's try it. Is that just bold? Here's our code sample. And here's our current import line. Right now, we're just importing this text UIKit component. If we want to use something like strong or emphasis or strike through, you have to add these. So I'm just going to add strong and copy that. Put a comma here. And what this allows us to do now is inside this JSX code, we can now wrap text around some strong tags. So let's try that. And in the example here, it's the outer tags are text and end text, and they just, within there, they have some strong tags. So let's try that. Let's just put strong right here. Just be careful. You want to begin and end your tags properly. You want to start them and terminate them right. So I'm going to save this and see what happens. Ooh, look at that. Error rendering app encountered unknown component strong. Well, we have strong on here. And how's it different? It's case sensitive. So let's go over here and change that to a capital S, as well as this one. And we're going to save again. I'll refresh the whole page. There it is, finally. So we're getting there. It looks bolder, but it's not quite that size. Back to the documentation. And again, we are inside this the documentation for the text component. If you are lost, again, reference user interface, UIKit components, and I'm kind of zooming into just this text component here. What are the other properties? Is there anything in here that would help us increase its size? I'm going to be the spoiler here and tell you that it's no, but I'm going to jump right to it. It's the heading component. So if you do know HTML, maybe you've seen like H1 tags or H2 tags or header tags. This is the component that we want to use in order to create a heading sized font. Let's just get rid of strong. We don't need it. I'm going to undo all that. Get rid of this. Get rid of this. And in fact, we'll get rid of strong. What we are going to do though is take a look at this documentation. Add the heading component to your app. We need to add this into our code, so we will import it. If I save it, nothing's going to change because we haven't added any elements to our code yet. But here's an example. Heading as H1 heading. We'll get into stack a little bit later, but right now, heading. Let's just copy this one right here. Okay, and let's put it above, at the very top. And let's change the text. This is an H1 heading. Again, the syntax is opening heading tag, a property as, and then you choose your value. It can either be H1 all the way down to H6, H1 being the largest, H6 being the smallest. I have some text, and then I terminate that heading tag. I'm going to save this, head over back to Confluence and see what happens. There it is. This is an H1 heading. That is the syntax we need. This is the library we need. This is the component we need. So we have heading there, loading properly. What we're going to do is take this text. I'm going to cut that and replace this in here. Great. So we essentially got rid of a text fragment and we added this heading one. I'm going to save this now and let's see what happens. Wow, we are 1/4 of the way there. Okay, I'm going to skip this one right now because this one looks very similar to these two. However, it has this little graphic on there. I don't want to jump to that one yet. I'm going to work with this little purple box right here. Right now, we want to kind of give this a purple background and maybe put it inside some kind of container where it stretches across the entire screen. What would we use for that? If you are already familiar with React components, or if you're not, I should say, you would jump through all of these and try to figure out which one it is. Is it a code block? No, not necessarily. I'll tell you right now, it is a box. And what's awesome about this documentation is that if you were just to scroll down, you'll find examples of boxes along with some sample code that you would use to render these boxes above. Let's just try it out. So the first thing we need to do at the very top, we need to import box. So let's go over here after heading. We're going to add box. I'll save that. You'll see my tunnel refreshing, but we're not using the box yet. And maybe rather than making changes directly to this code, let's just copy like one of these examples here. The very first one, basic box. I'm going to do this. Copy. I'm going to paste it. I'll paste it also at the very top and see what happens. Paste. I'm going to fix the formatting a bit so it's improve our readability. Okay, so what did we just add? We added a box with this padding space 400. We're going to get into what these numbers mean in just a little bit. And then background color. Also, like, what are these things? Why does it say color.background.discovery? Short answer, there's these things called Atlassian design tokens. And it's essentially like a language that helps you to like quickly come up with consistent, color choices and spacing, etc. Let's see what this thing looks like. Well, there it is right there. It just made a purple box, almost perfect. So what do we need to do? If we want to get this text right here with this module in a purple box, Would we replace the word text with box? No, you would not do that. What you'd want to do is, let's just copy this. We'll cut that out. And right before we open up that text fragment, we're going to wrap it in a box. So I'm going to put some spacing in here so it's maybe easier to see. So that's our heading. The very first thing is our heading. We're going to skip this blue information box for now. We're jumping to this third one. And so all I did is we definitely created a box. What we want to do is shove this text fragment inside that box. Well, let's see what happens. I'm going to save this. Look at that. Almost there. I think that the numbers wise, we might be a little bit too aggressive on this padding. So I'm going to save that. See if it kind of shrinks it down. Perfect. Okay, let's take care of this third one here. Use cases are endless. I think I'm just going to copy line 18 here and pop it right above that and the box. And I think we're going to have two boxes. But perhaps, oh yeah, we have two boxes, no space in between, even though there's this space thing here. Interesting. And it looks like it's a single box, but it's actually two. Let's choose a different color for that. So let's go to box and try to understand. There it is. These are the color scheme names inside this, our design tokens. The purple is called discovery and the green one is called success. So let's just change this second box to have a background color of success. We'll save that. Take a look. Awesome, look at that. We have two boxes. All right, so back to this blue one up here. To render your app on a full page, simply add really, I could just wrap this thing inside of a box. Let's just copy that and let's take a look. And what would be the color token for blue? What are our options? Background color token. So maybe this is a good time to actually jump into it. If you go to the documentation, you'll see for box, for background color, it's sending us to the Atlassian design system. And there are names of all of these different colors. We had discovery, and that's that purple there. We want blue and something maybe light. So the name of that is called information. So let's just try that. Let's just change this to, well, first of all, let's save this code and see this thing wrapped into hopefully it will be a purple box at the very top. There it is. And we want to change this to say information. Save. And look at that. It is that color blue. Lovely. What is that little information eye thing there? Is there anything inside the box component that allows us to add an image? And there's not. That's nothing that is intrinsic to the box component. I'm going to save you some time and tell you what this thing is. It is called a section message. Now, a section message, it's used to add alerts to a certain section of a page. And even though there's nothing really actionable that we're doing here, we're just kind of sending some random text. Its real use case is if you're sending warning messages, right? If you want to have a message that could have an action as well. So for instance, you can make it dismissible, or you can add a hyperlink or an href to send them off to someplace else if they were to click on this thing, right? So right now we're not going to use actions. So all we want to do is utilize this UI kit component called section message. And in order to do that, we need to add some code. So we're not going to add an action. We're just going to add the section message. So let's just add that to our code at the very top. After box, I'm going to add section message. And what do I need to do? Well, look at that. The very first example is one that looks just like what we wanted. And so this is what the code sample looks like. So it's section message appearance information. Let's get rid of this box because we don't want it to be a box. We want it to be inside of a section message. Copy that. Pop it right there. We just make some updates there, and the linting went well. And look at that. Beautiful. It looks almost identical to our little demo screenshot on the left. What's the difference, though? What do we have? We have some spacing between these things. Some spacing in between all of these three elements. And again, we have actually 4 elements here. We have the heading element, this heading as H1. We have the section message, which we just added now. We have another box element, which has the purple, the discovery color, and then we have this last box element with some text in it with the background color green or success. What we need to do is add some spaces in between. So again, back to our list of UIKit components. If you're familiar with CSS or with front-end design, you might be familiar with terms like inline, right? Or flexbox. These are things that allow you to format and arrange things on a page, or components on a page. Well, I'm going to jump to the one that we need to use, which is this thing called stack. And what stack does, it manages the vertical layout of components. So if I were to encapsulate all these things inside of a stack, I create a stack here and I put one down and I end it down at the bottom. All these things are going to be children of the stack. Let's take an example here. Right now they are kind of stacked vertically, but if we wanted to add some space in between, we have some additional properties that we'd add to the stack. So let's just copy and paste some code here. The very first thing we need to do is import stack. So that word stack, I'm going to move it right here after section message, the last component we added to our imports. Let's go with the first example. Let's just say stack. Stack here, and the stack here. In some of these smart code editors, you can highlight the section of text and just then hit tab, and it'll move it all over. Okay, so what did we do? We added stack to our imports, and then we added a stack component here, and then we terminated here at the end. Let's see if it does anything. All right, it looks exactly the same. I'm going to refresh this just to make sure. Yep, didn't do a darn thing. But what we need to do is take a look at this space property. Will control spacing between items with the space property. So let's just add that space property here to our stack and see what happens. Again, only one stack is defined, and I put all of these things within the stack. So let's save it. Oh my goodness. How beautiful is that? Actually, I didn't realize that this blue section message would be, kissing right up against the G on Forge. Let's add that to the stack as well. So we'll take their heading and we'll put that inside the stack. So now all 4 of our elements are within the stack. If I save this, what I expect to happen is that there will be a nice space here underneath that G between that heading and this first section message. And there you go. We just did it. Awesome. Discovering and trying out different UIKit components can be a lot of fun. Well, so far we've worked with a few of them. You'll discover that there's a wide range of these pre-built customizable components at your disposal. By combining them, you can build truly rich app experiences that deliver both great usability and delight to your users. And in addition to being easy to use and customizable, UIKit components are built to align with the Atlassian design system and visual language that's used across the Atlassian products. That helps you to build UIs that are polished and seamless with less effort. In our very first Hello World macro, we were using the text component, which is what we use to display body text. When you take a closer look at the docs for this component, you'll find that it also has inline children components like EM and strong, allowing you to make inline text appear in italics or bold. For adding headings to sections, we just use the heading component. The most important property for headings is the as property, which allows you to set the size with values from H1, the largest, down to H6, the smallest. Here's a component that we haven't used yet, the lozenge. A lozenge is typically used to present item status in those little colored capsules with messages like in progress, pending review, or completed. With UIKit, it's as simple as importing the lozenge component at the top and just adding the lozenge tag directly into your code. There are also interactive UI components, ones that can collect information from a user or even perform an action like sending them off to another URL. For example, here's the button component. Its appearance can be styled, and of course you can have your button perform an action when it's clicked. Sometimes the best way to learn is just to play around with them, like we've been doing here. I recommend taking some time right now and trying out some new ones that you haven't tried before. Keep a Forge tunnel running and just have some fun. If you're really adventurous, play around with stack and inline and learn how components can be arranged vertically and horizontally. Go ahead, add some badges, more boxes, buttons, tabs, text fields. See what they all look like, how they work, and think about how you might use them in your app. Visiting this link will jump you directly to where all the UIKit components are in the documentation. For the next exercise, we're going to learn about another Forge module called Content Byline. I mentioned it earlier in the session. It's a module that gives our app the ability to embed itself in the byline area, which is right below the title and right above the body. That's the byline area right there. For this exercise, we're not going to build it from scratch. Rather, we're going to download a sample app from developer.atlassian.com and learn a new Forge CLI command called Forge Register, which allows us to take an existing Forge app repository and register the app as our own new app. So if you can open up your browser and head over to developer.atlassian.com, click on that button, and this will take us into the heart of Forge documentation. Next, you're going to find example apps in the left navigation area. Expand that section and click on Confluence, which will bring us to a list of fully functional and open source sample apps for Confluence. And somewhere in that list of apps is the Page Approver app. Right now it's at the top of the page, but when you're watching this, it might be somewhere further down the list. Just find the Page Approver app and click the link on the details code section, and this will bring us to the Bitbucket repository for this sample app. And what we're looking at here is the repository for this app. If you're familiar with the git command line, you can clone this app using that git command. But another way to do this is to use the downloads link here from the left navigation. When you click download, it'll be a zip file. And depending if you're on Mac or Windows, what happens when you click on a zip file might differ. What I'd like you to do is open up that zip file archive, expand it, and move that newly created folder into the folder that has our Hello World app. I'm going to show you my terminal window right now so you can see where I placed it. Okay, here we are in my terminal in the bottom left. I've unzipped the file with the Page Approver sample app and placed it into this folder. So there's our Hello World app, and at the same level as this right here. So we can go inside of this folder and take a look at all the files. But I say let's open it up in our code editor. All right, there we are. This is the source code to a fully functional sample app. Right now, it's located on our local machine, and let's just take a look at the manifest. The manifest is very similar to the last one, except in the module list, you'll see that it has the Confluence content byline item module and not the macro module. It's a title and a description. There's also some additional scopes here. This gives our app the ability to read Confluence properties, to write Confluence properties, as well as read the content summary. And there's another new section here, external images, which allows our Forge app to load and display images that are hosted on the Atlassian.com domain. So we're going to take a closer look into the source code later, but first, let's learn a new Forge CLI command called register. Because right now we have a copy of this on our local machine, but it's not ready to be deployed or installed because it first has to be registered. And when we used the Forge create command in the first exercise, it also registered that new app into our list of apps. And the register command is used to take a project that may have been created by somebody else, like this sample app, and register it as a new app on our own. Let's try it. Forge register. And we can keep our manifest loaded here in our code editor to see what it does, because it does add a couple lines to it. So enter a name, we'll call it page approver. And it says, hey, it's ready to work on, deploy and install. And what it did, it added actually just one line. It added this app ID, and it's going to be different in your manifest. The app ID is a unique ID that every single Forge app has, and so that's what it added to our manifest. We're not quite ready to do a Forge deploy yet because we need to install some Node.js dependencies. So how do we do that? There's a command called npm install. And what it's going to do is going to look inside this package.json file, and in it are a list of dependencies or libraries that need to be downloaded before we can deploy. So let's try that. And this may take a little more time depending on the speed of your connection. If you were to go into the repository on Bitbucket or open up the README file, there's also instructions here. So clone the repository is the first thing we did, or downloaded it. It said do Forge register, which we did, and I just did the npm install. The next command it's asking us to type in is Forge deploy. So let's try that. And this is going to deploy the app into the default environment, in which our case is the development environment. So it did some syntax checking. Now it's deploying it into the Atlassian Cloud. And when this is done, we'll move on to the next step, Forge install. Great. Last command, Forge install. We'll select Confluence. And here you'll type in the name of your developer instance. Some information here that's related to what's inside of our manifest. It's saying that your app is requesting these scopes, and it's going to exchange some data with Atlassian.com. If you look at the manifest, you can see these are the scopes that were defined. And this section here says that it's giving our app permissions to load images from the Atlassian.com domain, which this app will be doing. So yes, your app in the dev environment is now installed. Let's see this app in action. So I'm going to load the page that we were just using in our Hello World, first two exercises. And there it is, right here. This section is the content byline, and this is new. So if I were to click this, this information is being rendered from the app here that we have just deployed and installed. So this is the functionality of this app, really, is to approve or unapprove a page. But really what it's demonstrating is the content byline. So you can have your Forge app present information in different parts of the UI, and in this sample app it is doing it here, up in the byline. So as we make changes to these values, it'll get reflected in the page properties, and whether it's approved or rejected will reflect for every single user that loads this page. Downloading, registering, and playing around with sample apps is a great way to learn about modules, their mechanics, and use cases. There's a growing collection of example apps that you can find links to in the documentation. It's as easy as downloading a repo and then using Forge Register. Sometimes you might want your Forge app to be only visible to certain users with certain privileges. And in this next exercise, we're going to explore something called display conditions, which allows us to control the visibility of our app modules in the UI. For example, the page approver app that we just added in the previous exercise, it would be available for anyone on my Confluence instance to approve or unapprove pages. But imagine we only wanted space administrators to see that Forge app and thus make changes to page status. Well, display conditions can help with that. They enable you to control the visibility of app modules in the UI. Let's head over to the documentation and see how we can accomplish this. So you can just go to the docs and search for display conditions. And right here it says, using display conditions, you can control the visibility of your app modules in the UI. We want to look for Confluence specific examples. And at the very top is the one I'm actually interested in. I want to restrict the page approver app to only be viewable by space administrators. And the syntax is simply adding this display conditions key in your manifest underneath the module that we are adding this condition to. So here I have on my manifest on the left-hand side the Confluence content byline item, and I'm just going to add a couple lines here. The first line is display conditions, and the next thing I'm going to type in is space admin true? What this is going to do is, before this renders, it's going to check for this module, are there any display conditions? If I am a space admin, this module will render in the UI. If I'm not a space admin, it won't show. So let's do a Forge deploy because we're making a change to the manifest. Here's the page. I'm logged in with an account that is a space administrator. So if I were to reload this page, I should still see the app here. However, I created a second account on my test instance called DevTest, it's DT, and they do not have space administrator access. I'm going to head over to a different browser session that I have where I'm logged in as that user. And before I made that change, you can see that this user, DevTest, still has the ability to view the page approver app. But now I'm going to refresh this. And you'll notice it did not render. So now our page approver app is only viewable by those that are space administrators. That was just one use case for display conditions. Similarly, you can restrict a module from being rendered with other properties, like checking if they're a product admin, if they are a site admin, or even if they're an authenticated logged in user, which is pretty useful if you have a publicly accessible set of spaces and pages. You can also apply display conditions to a variety of modules, not just the content byline item. Display conditions can also be applied to Confluence entity properties. You can check if a property exists, if it's equal to a certain value, contains a certain value, or even utilize operators to create complex display rules. For example, you could set display conditions that do things like render this Forge app in the UI if the user is a space administrator or a certain entity property exists for this page or for this space. For our next exercise, we're going to explore another module called the content action. I mentioned this module earlier in the presentation, and it's the one where when a user taps on that ... button on the top right of the page or a blog, they're presented with a long drop-down menu. And if your app is using the content action module, it'll appear right there to the users. And when the user clicks on your app name, a modal window or a pop-up is going to come up on your screen, and the Forge app will run inside that container. Your app will have the context of what space and page the user was just on, so it can do something useful. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to build an app that uses a context menu module, and our goal for this app is to tell the user how many characters are on that page. So head over to your terminal and just type in Forge create. We'll call it the Forge character count. And we're going to select UIKit, Confluence, and Confluence Content Action. The app is ready to work on. Let's open it up in our editor. Take a quick look at the source code. It should look familiar. There's some front end code. This looks just like the Confluence macro. Prints hello world a couple times. There's a back end function called getText that also just returns hello world. But before we do anything else, let's just go into this folder from our command prompt and let's run forge deploy and a forge install so we can see it on our instance. And I think for this exercise, we're just going to go step by step in terms of how we are writing out the requirements for the app and then just kind of stumbling through this and discovering how we're going to solve each of the problems and how we're going to get to that printing out the number of characters that are on a page. Okay, it's deployed. Now let's try forge install. Select Confluence. Type in the name of your testing instance. All right, your app is now installed. I'm going to reload this page. And if I click on the ... more actions menu, I should see forge car count down there at the bottom. Let's open that up and see what it does. Lo and behold, it's printing hello world twice. Perfect. So before we start coding anything, let's just take a step back and think of all the things that we want our app to do. Like, what are the requirements? Our goal is to present the number of characters in the body of the Confluence page. So first thing we need to do is get the page ID from the that our app is running on. To fetch the page content using the Confluence REST API. 3, count the number of characters. 4, display the count in the modal pop-up. Okay, so the first thing we should do is try to get that page ID from the page that the app's running on. So how do we do that? Our macro that we built earlier had the ability to know what space we were in, what page we were on, and so does the content action module. Unlike the global page modules, which did not have a space or page context, both the macro and the content action module does. How do we fetch that? There is something called product context. I just searched for product context. You can also get to it by going to reference, user interface, UI kit hooks, product context. So this is what we call a UI kit hook. And this hook reads the context in which the component is currently running. And note that context data is loaded asynchronously, so its output will be undefined while it's still loading. So what we need to do is, first step is import this. So here we go. Let's put that into right after text. So we'll just keep some notes here. Added use product context to import below. Put this comment right there so we can kind of see where we're adding code. And let's take a look at the example that they have here. How does this thing work? In this example, and they simply defined a new variable called context. Let's try it out. Let's just put it right here at the very top. Add context variable which holds the product context. What's inside this thing? And what the heck did they mean here by saying that it's loaded asynchronously and will be undefined? Let's just console log this thing. The context is context. Okay, and I saved that. Let's run the tunnel and see what happens. So back to my page. Okay, I'm gonna reload this and let's execute the app and see what happens. Ooh. There is some context that's showing here. Where is this coming from? So this console log is coming from the back end here, this index.js resolvers right there. That's where all this is coming from. So we're going to comment out this here. The app is still running successfully, but we're going to comment that out, save it, and hopefully this time we don't see all that. We want to see our, okay, app is still running. However, back to front end index.jsx, I was trying to console log something out, but it's not showing up here in the terminal. Do you know why? Well, remember, front end, this index.jsx is what renders on the client side. That's why we call it the front end. In order to see that console log output from this side of the app, the front end, we need to go into the console here. I'm going to expand this a bit, shrink the font. Let's get rid of all these things. And I'm going to try it again. There it is. Seeing it a few times. First it says undefined and then context is, context is. Let's try that again. Again, I'm in the browser's console. Let's just take a look and see what's inside here. So we have this, it's an object, right? It's not just a string. And if we look at the documentation, they explain this is what the interface looks like. You should see something like account ID, the cloud ID, etc., etc. What we're looking for is a little bit different. And it's right here, extension. Contextual information about the current environment that depends on the extension being used. The format of this information varies across different products that the component may be installed on. Back to inspection. If we were to go dig deeper into this and we look at extension, this is where all the information that we need is located. So the content ID. So it's kind of buried in there. So let's just do this. Context dot extension dot content dot ID. This may not work, but we're gonna try anyway. Let's clear all this out. And it's not printing anything, okay? In fact, you notice the modal is not even popping up. The reason why is because this is something along the line here is not defined. There's a null value that's occurring. So what we can do is put these little question marks here, which will help us to avoid errors. So I'm going to save this and reload. And retry it. Haha, there it is. The context is, and that's our page ID. Pro tip here, if you ever try to run your app and the thing that you know should always happen is not happening, for example, this modal window did not pop up when there was an error. I just knew, based on that documentation saying that everything was very asynchronous and the fact that this thing keeps on printing multiple times, that traversing through this, that one of these was not fully populated. It just was not ready yet. So it got down to this part of the code, but it was not populated yet. So what these question marks do is checks to see whether it exists or not before it'll continue. And this is essentially a way to do some error handling. But I think that probably what we want to do instead of doing it here, we want to put it down inside this thing called useEffect. So the useEffect hook ensures that code runs after a component has been rendered. And we want to put things that have to do with the context inside there because the context may not be ready, just like the documentation said. So what we're going to do, paste this in here. And we'll put a condition. If context. One additional thing we need to do is type in context here. Let's save this and see what happens. And let's rerun it again. There it is. It's only printing once now, because only when context has a value will this code execute. This is exactly what we're looking for, and we have the page ID. Okay, so we have that page ID. The next thing we wanted to do was actually fetch the page content using the Confluence REST API. We don't want to make API calls here in the front end. This is what this area of the code is for, this back end. We use the resolvers in the second exercise where we made an API call to fetch the current user's name. Well, we're also going to use a resolver function, a backend function, to fetch the page information. So let's just take over this hello world function here where we're returning hello world. Get page. So we're going to repurpose this. We're going to rename this to get page. And we're not going to pass it this thing here. We're going to pass it the content ID. So we'll just say content ID with and this is the value that it will have. Context dot, right here, extension dot content dot ID. And we need to put this inside here. So only if the context is available, we will then invoke this backend function called getPage. It's going to send it the content ID, and when it returns information back about that page, it's going to save it inside. It's going to use this setter function to save it inside this data variable, which, by the way, is defined right here. So again, we're on the front end, and what we're doing is we've got the product context. When the context is fully loaded, because even the doc said that this is going to be asynchronous, and when it's ready, we're going to run this get page function on the back end. And we're going to pass that function the current content ID. So let's go back to the back end, and there's a couple things we need to do here. We need to import the API module. And then we also need to call the Confluence REST API to get the page content. So let's go to the documentation. We're going to go to documentation, Confluence, and we're in API v2 and go down to page resource. And we want to get page by ID. Okay. I'm in the reference documentation on the Confluence Cloud REST API v2, and I'm going down to the page resource and finding this method get page by ID. So returns a specific page is the description of this method, and let's do some copying and pasting. So let's import the API library here, pop it in right there. And then call the REST API to get the page content. So let's put that down in, we'll put that to do right here. Let's just do some copying and pasting from here. This is the, again, get page by ID, and we'll paste it. So we have some errors. Those little squiggly red lines mean that there's an error. We'll get to that in a second. We need to make sure that we are putting the right ID in here. What value should that be? It needs to be the page ID. So where do we get that from? We got it from we passed it. It was been passed to us here on the front end. Again, here's the invocation of get page. It's passing this, and we need to receive it properly on the index.js inside this resolvers. Request.payload.contentID is how we will do that. And we need to address these errors here. Async is how we do that. Not there, right here. And those disappear. What we want to do is make this API call, but not necessarily continue until we get the response. Well, let's go to our to-do list. So we want to fetch the page using the REST API. We need to get the content specifically, but let's go step by step. What did we do so far? We got to the part where we are making the API call, which is here. As user, request Confluence, wiki, API v2 pages, content ID. Let's make sure that the response really does contain what we're looking for. Const response JSON is equal to await response.json. Again, going to wait until the value is available. Console log this. And let's get rid of all this. Oh, that was from the copy paste here. Let's just save this and see what happens. Oop, got an error. Why? Because our manifest does not have any scopes defined. And if we go back to the documentation, there is a scope that's required, read Confluence page. We'll just copy this, paste it here, and let's look what happens at our manifest. It should add these scopes. There it is, permission scopes, read Confluence page. Now a forge deploy, because we were making some permissions changes to our manifest. Now it's saying we need to run forge install upgrade to put those changes into effect. Hit enter. Yes. So now let's try our tunnel out and see if our app is still operational. We did make some pretty material changes here. Okay, I'll reload this page. It's listening for requests. And here we go. Okay, so far-ish, so good. I mean, we got the first hello world here, and now it just says loading. I think it just says loading because it's waiting for something to show up here for some data. Let's comment out this line. We'll just get rid of it entirely. Save that, and let's reload this. I think that was kind of throwing an error. Okay, so we got the hello world, and we have some console log output here. And what are we looking for? We have the title. Console log output came from right here. So let's just double check that. Let's just put a little response JSON is, just to make sure. Scroll up. Yeah, there it is. The response JSON is so excellent. We're in a really good spot right now. We have fetched the page information. We see the title. What I don't see is a body. It's the content is really empty right now. So let's try to figure that one out. It's not returning a body. Let's expand this a bit. We need to pass over this parameter called body format. By the way, I'm going to probably try this request out in my browser so you can actually see what it looks like there. In fact, let's just do that right now. We have that page ID. ID's right there. So let's just copy this, go to our instance. This is what it looks like, unformatted. I have a little plugin that does some pretty printing, and so this is what it looks like. And indeed, we don't have anything inside this body. So going back to the documentation, there was this body format query parameter, and let's just try different ones like storage. So what does that do? Body format equals storage. Ah, look at that. Now we have some data. I see that there's a paragraph tag with some HTML in there, and I don't necessarily want that. What other values are available to us? So let's try view. Looks the same. How about styled view? Even worse, it has way too much markup in there. I think that our best bet is probably just going to be just view. Okay, great. We can deal with a couple paragraph tags here and there. That's the information that we want to count the length of body dot view dot value. So let's just try that. For body is dot body dot view dot value. And I'm hoping it's going to reflect down here at the bottom. So let's go back to our testing site, rerun this app. Error, cannot read properties of undefined. Ah, interesting. Oh, I didn't update this here in my request. Syntax, body format equals view. Body format equals view. Going to save that. Let's rerun the app. There it is, body view value. So let's try traversing down there, body.view.value. Oh, and there it is. Let's just move this out of the way. Look at that. Perfect. So we know that we have what we want. Let's just return that thing now. We'll return the whole thing and we'll deal with the parsing on the front end. So we'll say return response JSON. We'll return that to the front end because again, we're in the resolver's back end right now. Let's go back to the front end. This is where we called it. And when it gets a response, it's going to save it inside this data variable that we defined up here. So at this point, we should have in data the whole response JSON from the API call. And how can we test that? Maybe let's just print out the title, something small, right? So how about this? We'll just put a little text component in here. This is the page title, colon, and then the syntax is a curly brace, and we're going to look for data dot title. Is that right? Let's scroll back up here. title. Yeah, right there. Now, we're going to need to put a question mark here because it might not be loaded yet. So this will help us avoid any kind of errors. And let's reload. And hopefully what I will see is this is the page title. And look at that. We got the page title. Let's try grabbing that body again. It is body view value. Let's try this. Body.view.value. And let's see, will it replace it up here? Ha 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 ha, it did it. Well, there's a really quick and dirty way we can do this. Character count of body. Does anyone know? It would be dot length. Save. I'm going to kill this hello world line. Save, and look what's going to happen right here. Very nice. Now, it's a little bit rudimentary in the sense that we're not stripping out any kind of HTML tags and that markup for the paragraph, and that's fine. That's about 452 characters right there. In fact, let's just edit this page. So let's say this is another set of characters that should increase the count to something greater than 452. We'll update. And we'll run the app again. Here we go. 554. It's working. How about that? Not bad. So again, let's take a look at our requirements. The goal was to present the number of characters in the body of a Confluence page. Success so far. But really more importantly, let's think of the things that we did. Got the page ID that our app is running on. And how did we do that? We used this thing called product context, right? This is where we instantiated it. And then down below, if the context exists, then fetch the page on the back end with the content ID. So this first value, that's a key, and this is the value that we are passing. And then whatever is returned will get saved into this data variable, which we use further down below. But let's jump right from here into our backend. Again, resolvers index.js. Now we are inside this get page function. And inside that function, what we wanted to do was make the API call to Confluence to fetch the page information, including the body. What we received on our request was this request variable. Interface for that is rec.payload and then the key that we passed, which is content ID. And this is the content ID that we're passing into that API request. So again, we're making an API request here, and when the API call is finished, we return the full response back to the front end. And on the front end, we save it by using this setter method, set data, saves it inside this data variable, and then down below, we got rid of the hello worlds, and we're just saying character count of body equals, and then if data exists, traverse body view value dot length, and then we have this. We just built an app from scratch that does something actually kind of useful. Very cool. Well, that's a wrap. Kudos for making it through this virtual workshop. Let's recap what we learned today. First, Forge makes it easy to build apps quickly. You jump directly into building your first app with Forge, the Hello World macro, which we made about 7 times cooler in the next exercise when we customize it to display the current user's name. When you use Forge Create, you're presented with nearly 100 app templates to help you get bootstrapped with sample code. And the Forge tunnel, you can quickly iterate and test changes to your code without having to redeploy. Also, Forge makes it easy to import existing sample apps and register them as your own, so you can learn by example. Additionally, we learned that throughout the documentation, you'll find code snippets that make it easy to try out and test different modules, API methods, and more. Then, we learned about UI kit components and how it makes it a lot easier to build out rich UIs. From a module perspective, we tried out the macro, the content byline, and content action modules. There are also a lot of other modules and extension points that you can use in your Forge app. And lastly, having your Forge app make calls to the Confluence REST API is simple with the use of convenience packages and methods. There's no need to deal with OAuth dances and storing API tokens and secrets. Just import the package and your app is ready to start making API calls. You can refer to the documentation to understand the interface for all of the resources and methods available. There's a lot more exciting things for you to explore and learn about beyond what we covered today. Be sure to check out the sample apps, guides, and tutorials in the documentation. I'll include links in the description. There's also a link to a repository that contains the exercises we did today, as well as some bonus exercises that we didn't cover in this video. To stay on top, subscribe to the Atlassian Developer YouTube channel and sign up for our newsletter. Thanks for watching.